They made one law, one single, catastrophic law, and it broke the galaxy. The vote took 11 seconds. 11 seconds to condemn an entire species. 11 seconds to erase 8 billion souls from the galactic registry. 11 seconds to make the worst mistake in the recorded history of the Milky Way. Ambassador Kira Voss stood in the center of the Grand Conclave Chamber on Station Aurelian, the political heart of the Galactic Federated Council, and watched it happen. She watched 1,200 delegates from 416 species raise their voting crystals in near-perfect unison. Blue for condemnation. Blue, blue, blue. An ocean of cold, shimmering blue light that washed across the domed ceiling like a frozen wave. Only 3 crystals glowed amber. 3 species out of 416 who voted to abstain. Not a single one voted green. Not one voice rose in humanity's defense. The Grand Arbiter, a towering Volanthi with 6 arms and skin like cracked obsidian, read the proclamation in a voice that resonated through every translator in the chamber. By unanimous condemnation of the Galactic Federated Council, the species designation human, origin world Earth, soul system Orion arm, is hereby declared class Omega existential threat. Effective immediately, all human beings are reclassified as illegal entities within council-governed space. All human settlements are to be dismantled. All human ships are to be seized. All human individuals are to be detained, relocated, and confined to their origin world, which will be placed under permanent quarantine. Humanity is hereby declared illegal. Kira didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She smiled. And that smile would haunt the dreams of every delegate in that chamber for years to come. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said quietly. Her words were picked up by the chamber's acoustic amplifiers and carried to every ear, every auditory membrane, every vibration-sensitive tentacle in the room. "But you will." She turned and walked out. Her boots echoed against the crystalline floor. Sharp, deliberate, unhurried, the massive doors of the conclave chamber sealed behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. That was day 1. To understand why the galaxy declared humanity illegal, you have to understand what humanity had become in the 70 years since first contact. When a Volanthi scout ship discovered Earth in 2089, humanity was, by galactic standards, an infant species. They had barely touched their own moon. They were still burning fossil fuels. They hadn't even unified their own planet. They were fractured into nearly 200 squabbling nations that couldn't agree on the temperature of their own atmosphere. The Council welcomed them the way you might welcome a stray animal into your home, with cautious pity and a quiet understanding that it would probably chew on the furniture. But humanity didn't chew on the furniture. Humanity studied the furniture. Then it improved the furniture. Then it started selling better furniture back to the species that had invented it. Within a decade, human engineers had reverse-engineered Council faster-than-light drives and improved their efficiency by 31%. Within 20 years, human doctors had developed treatments for diseases that had plagued alien species for millennia, diseases those species had simply accepted as facts of life. Within 30 years, human traders had woven themselves so deeply into galactic economy that removing them would have been like removing the bones from a living body. And that was the problem. Humanity didn't conquer. Humanity didn't invade. Humanity integrated. It adapted. It made itself essential. The Red Hani, a proud warrior species that had dominated galactic military affairs for 6,000 years, suddenly found that human tactical advisors were winning battles they couldn't. The Sonari, master economists who had controlled interstellar trade routes since before humanity had discovered fire, found their markets being outmaneuvered by human traders who worked on intuition and audacity rather than centuries-long strategy. The Calaxan, renowned scientists who had mapped the quantum foundations of reality itself, found human researchers asking questions they had never thought to ask, and finding answers that shook the foundations of accepted science. Species after species watched humanity rise, not with weapons, not with threats, but with an almost frightening adaptability that made every other species feel, for the first time in their histories, inadequate. Fear is a powerful motivator. And fear wrapped in wounded pride is the most dangerous force in the universe. The whisper campaigns began around year 40. Quiet conversations in private chambers. Concern memos passed between ambassadors. Phrases like unchecked growth and destabilizing influence and existential trajectory started appearing in council reports. By year 50, the whispers had become proposals. By year 60, the proposals had become draft resolutions. And by year 70, the draft resolutions had become the vote that Kira Voss watched with that terrible, knowing smile. The official justification was a 70-page document. It was full of graphs, projections, and carefully worded analyses. But stripped of its diplomatic language, it said one thing: humans are too good at everything. And if we don't stop them now, they'll replace us all. So they voted. 11 seconds. Blue crystals. Done. Day 30 was when the galaxy first began to understand its mistake. The forced relocation of humanity was, on paper, a straightforward operation. There were approximately 2 billion humans living off-world, on stations, on colony worlds, on trading posts and research facilities scattered across 300 star systems. The Council Enforcement Fleet, a massive armada drawn from dozens of member species, was dispatched to round them up. The humans didn't fight. That was the part that confused everyone. The Council had prepared for resistance. They had war plans. They had suppression strategies. They had entire divisions of Red Honey shock troops, standing ready for battles that never came. Instead, the humans just left. They packed their belongings. They shut down their businesses. They closed their laboratories and clinics and trading houses. They boarded their ships and they went home. But before they left, they did something far more devastating than any act of war. They took their knowledge with them. On the colony world of Thessar Prime, human agricultural engineers had tripled the planet's food output. When they left, they deleted their proprietary farming algorithms and walked away. Within 6 months, crop yields collapsed. Famine spread across 3 continents. The Thessari government sent desperate messages to the Council begging for help, but no other species knew how to replicate what the humans had done. The techniques were too intuitive, too adapted to conditions that only human minds had been able to read. On Station Meridian, the largest medical research facility in the Outer Rim, human doctors had been running a treatment program for Volanti crystalline bone disease, a condition that affected 1 in 4 Volanti, a condition that had been considered incurable for 8,000 years. The humans had found a cure. They had been administering it for free. When they left, they took the cure with them, not out of spite. They simply owned the intellectual property. And the Council's own laws that predated humanity's arrival by millennia, stated that expelled species could not be compelled to surrender proprietary knowledge. The Council had written that law to protect themselves. Now it protected humanity. On the trading hub of Courant, human merchants have been the primary intermediaries in a complex web of commerce connecting 67 species. They had relationships, contacts, trust networks, and logistical systems that had taken decades to build. When they vanished overnight, the web collapsed. Trade disputes erupted. Supply chains shattered. 3 species that had been at peace for centuries nearly went to war over shipping routes that human brokers had been managing with casual efficiency. And these were just the obvious consequences. The subtle ones were worse. Day 90, the Galaxian delegation requested an emergency council session. High scientist Mordhax, the most respected researcher in the Galaxian consensus, stood before the conclave and delivered a report that sent ripples of shock through the chamber. We have conducted a comprehensive audit of all active research projects within Council space, Mordhax said, his bioluminescent frills pulsing with agitation. Of the 14,612 projects currently in progress across all disciplines, we have determined that 9,104 of them, 62%, relied on human contributions at a foundational level. Human theories, human data, human methodologies, human insights. He paused, letting the number sink in. Of those 9,000 projects, approximately 7,000 have stalled completely since the human removal. We lack the personnel to continue them. In many cases, we lack the fundamental understanding to continue them, because the humans made conceptual leaps that our researchers cannot replicate. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Among the stalled projects, Mordhax continued, are the Unified Field Reconciliation, our best hope for next-generation energy production, the Cascade Immunity Program, projected to eliminate 7 major pandemics across 12 species within the next decade, and the Navigational Fold Initiative, which would have reduced faster-than-light travel times by a factor of 8. The murmur became a roar. In short, Mordhax said, his voice cutting through the noise, by removing humanity, we have not only lost our most productive research partners, we have, in many cases, lost the ability to even understand the work they were doing. Grand Arbiter Thescaran raised 3 of his 6 arms for silence. What do you recommend, High Scientist? Mordhax's frills dimmed, the Galaxian equivalent of a grimace. I recommend we acknowledge, privately if not publicly, that this was a catastrophic error. He paused. But I suspect it is already too late for acknowledgement to matter. He was right. It was too late, but not for the reasons he thought. Day 150. The real crisis began. The Kreth Dominion attacked. The Kreth were not a Council species. They existed beyond the borders of Council space. A vast, predatory empire that had been testing Council defenses for centuries. The Council had always repelled them. The Rethani military was strong. The Council's combined fleet was formidable. The border held. But the border had been reinforced for the last 40 years by human tactical systems. Humanity hadn't just provided advisors to the Rethani military. They had fundamentally redesigned Council defense doctrine. Human strategists had identified weaknesses in the old system and patched them. Human engineers had upgraded sensor networks, weapons platforms, and shield systems across the entire border. Human intelligence analysts had built predictive models that could anticipate Kreth movements with uncanny accuracy. All of it was gone now. The old systems were still technically functional, but they were 3 decades out of date. The Rethani commanders who had grown accustomed to human tactical support found themselves suddenly blind and slow, fighting with tools they barely remembered how to use. The Kreth broke through in 3 places simultaneously. The Battle of Variant Gap was the worst. A Kreth battle fleet of 400 ships punched through a section of border that human analysts had flagged 2 years earlier as critically vulnerable. They had recommended reinforcements. The Council had approved the plan, but the human engineers who were supposed to install the new defense platforms had been deported before the work was completed. The Rethani Third Fleet responded. They fought with legendary courage. But courage alone couldn't compensate for the tactical disadvantage. Without human-designed predictive algorithms, they couldn't anticipate the Kreth fleet's movements. Without human-upgraded weapon systems, their firepower was 20% below what it should have been. Without human strategic doctrine, their commanders fell back on older, more rigid tactics that the Kreth had already learned to counter. The Third Fleet was destroyed. 18,000 Rethani warriors died in the void. It was the worst military defeat the Rethani had suffered in 400 years. Fleet Commander Corvith, one of 3 survivors pulled from the wreckage of his flagship, gave a single statement to the Council from his medical bed. We fought as Rethani. We died as Rethani. But we would have won as Rethani if we had still had our humans. The statement was censored by the Council's communications office. But it leaked. It always leaks. Day 200. Earth was silent. The quarantine was absolute. A fleet of Council warships surrounded the Sol system, blocking all communications in and out. No one knew what was happening on Earth. No one knew if humanity was suffering, rebuilding, or plotting. The uncertainty was maddening. But across Council space, things were unraveling faster than anyone had predicted. The food shortages on Thessar Prime had spread to 4 other agricultural worlds. The medical crisis was growing. Not just a Volanti bone disease, but dozens of other conditions that human doctors had been quietly, consistently treating. The economic collapse was accelerating as the intricate trade networks humanity had built continued to disintegrate, and the Kreth were advancing. They had taken 11 border systems. Millions of Council citizens were under occupation. The Rethani were fighting desperately, but they were losing ground with every engagement. Species began to turn on each other. Old rivalries, held in check for decades by the stability humanity had quietly provided, erupted back to surface. The Sonari accused the Thessari of hoarding food supplies. The Volanthi accused the Calaxan of withholding research that could help the war effort. The smaller species, the ones who had always relied on Council infrastructure for protection, began to panic. 3 species formally withdrew from the Council. 12 more threatened to follow. The Grand Arbiter called emergency session after emergency session, but each one devolved into shouting and accusations. The blue crystals that had condemned humanity so efficiently now seemed like a cruel joke, a reminder that the Council could act in perfect unity only when it was making a catastrophic mistake. Day 300. Ambassador Kira Voss appeared. No one knew how she had gotten to Station Aurelian. The quarantine was supposed to be impenetrable. The Sol system was surrounded. Every human ship had been seized or tracked. And yet, there she was, standing in the lobby of the Council Administrative Complex, wearing the same dark diplomatic suit she had worn on the day of the vote, carrying a single data tablet. She requested a meeting with the Grand Arbiter. She was polite. She was patient. She waited in the lobby for 7 hours while frantic Council officials tried to figure out what to do. Finally, Grand Arbiter Theskren agreed to see her, not in the conclave chamber. That would imply official recognition, but in a private meeting room. Just the two of them, plus a single Red Honey guard who looked deeply uncomfortable about the whole situation. Ambassador Voss, Thescaron said, settling his massive frame into a chair. You should not be here. Your species has been declared illegal. Yes, I remember. I was there. Kira sat across from him, calm as a lake in winter. I'm not here to argue about the legality of my presence. I'm here because your galaxy is falling apart, and we both know why. Thescaron's obsidian skin rippled, a sign of deep discomfort. The current difficulties are temporary. The Council is addressing. The Kref have taken 11 systems. Your border fleet is operating at 60% effectiveness. Your food production is in freefall. Your medical infrastructure is collapsing. Your economy is contracting at a rate that will trigger a full depression within 6 months. And 3 of your member species have already left the Council. Kira set the data tablet on the table. Those aren't difficulties, Grand Arbiter. That's a death spiral. Silence stretched between them. What do you want? Thescaron asked finally. I want you to understand something, Kira said. We knew this would happen, not the specifics. But we knew that removing humanity from the galactic ecosystem would cause a collapse. We knew it because we understood something about ourselves that you never did. And what is that? Kira leaned forward. We're not a threat. We never were. We're a keystone species. Thescaron blinked all 4 of his eyes. Explain. In Earth ecology, a keystone species is an organism that holds an ecosystem together. Remove it, and everything collapses. Not because the keystone species is the strongest or the most dominant, but because it fills a unique role that nothing else can fill. It creates connections. It maintains balance. It makes the whole system more than the sum of its parts. She tapped the data tablet. That's what humanity was doing. We weren't trying to replace you. We weren't trying to dominate you. We were filling gaps, connecting species that had never been connected, solving problems that individual species couldn't solve alone because they didn't have the right perspective. She looked him directly in the eye. We were the glue, Arbiter, and you dissolved the glue, and now everything is coming apart. Thescaron stared at her for a long time. If what you say is true, he said slowly, then the Council made a grave error. The Council made the error because it was afraid, Kira said, and there was no anger in her voice, only a kind of tired understanding. Every species in this galaxy achieved its position through millennia of slow, careful progress. You built your civilizations brick by brick, over thousands of years, and then humans showed up and started doing in decades what took you centuries. That was terrifying. I understand that. Truly, I do. She paused. But fear is not wisdom, and a law born of fear is not justice. What do you propose? Kira stood. I don't propose anything. Not yet. First, I need you to see something. She gestured toward the data tablet. That contains a file. One file. I'd like you to review it before we speak again. Thescaron picked up the tablet. What is in the file? A gift, Kira said, from a species that your council declared illegal. Consider it a demonstration of who we really are. She walked out. The Red Honey guard watched her go and made no move to stop her. Later, when asked why, he said simply, she was not a threat. Any warrior could see that. She was something else entirely. Thescaron opened the file alone in his chambers that night. It contained medical data. Specifically, it contained a complete treatment protocol for Volanthi crystalline bone disease, the cure that humanity had taken with them when they left. The data was exhaustive, meticulously documented, accompanied by step-by-step instructions that any competent Volanthi physician could follow. There was a note attached. It read, "We developed this cure because Volanthi children were suffering, not because we wanted leverage, not because we wanted power, because children were suffering and we knew how to stop it. We took the data when we left because the law required us to. We're giving it back now because conscience requires us to. Do with it what you will." It was signed, Dr. Sarachun, Human Medical Corps. Thescaron sat in the dark for a very long time. Then he began making calls. Day 320. Emergency session of the Grand Conclave. The chamber was tense. Delegates whispered and shifted in their seats. Everyone knew something was happening, but no one knew exactly what. Thescaron stood at the center of the chamber, all 6 arms folded, a posture of absolute authority that he had never adopted before in his entire tenure as Grand Arbiter. 320 days ago, he began, this council voted to declare humanity illegal. The vote was nearly unanimous. I presided over it. I allowed it. That decision is the single greatest failure of governance in the history of the Galactic Federated Council, and I bear personal responsibility for it. The chamber erupted, delegates shouted, crystals flashed, Theskrin raised all 6 arms, and the sheer authority of the gesture silenced them. I am not interested in debate, he said. I am interested in survival, our survival, which is currently in question. He activated the chamber's display systems. Holographic projections filled the dome. Maps, charts, graphs, data streams. The state of the galaxy laid bare in cold, luminous detail. The Kreth Dominion has taken 19 systems. Our military is failing. Our economy is contracting. Our food supplies are dwindling. Our medical systems are overwhelmed. 3 member species have withdrawn from the Council. 9 more are considering withdrawal. We are, by any rational assessment, in the early stages of civilizational collapse. He let the data speak for itself. The chamber was silent. All of this, Theskrin continued, is a direct consequence of removing humanity from our civilization. Not the only cause, but the primary catalyst. We removed a keystone species from our ecosystem, and the ecosystem is dying. He deactivated the displays. I have been in contact with Ambassador Kira Voss of Earth. She has made it clear that humanity does not seek revenge. They do not seek dominance. They seek only what they have always sought, a place among us, a chance to contribute, a chance to be part of something larger than themselves. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost gentle. They gave us back the cure for crystalline bone disease, freely, without conditions, while we had their entire species locked behind a quarantine fleet, while their legal status in our space was that of criminals. He let that land. They gave us back the cure because, in their words, children were suffering. A sound moved through the chamber. Not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur. Something deeper. Something that might have been shame. I am calling a vote, Theskrin said. Not to simply repeal the quarantine. Not to merely reverse the declaration. Something more than that. He raised his own crystal, and it glowed green. Bright, fierce, unwavering green. I am calling a vote to formally apologize to humanity, to acknowledge that we acted out of fear rather than wisdom, to invite them back, not as a tolerated presence, not as a monitored species, but as full and equal partners in this council, with a permanent seat, with a voice, with the recognition they earned 100 times over, and that we were too frightened to give them. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then a crystal glowed green, then another, then 10, then 100. The Red Honey delegation, every single one of them, raised green crystals. Fleet Commander Corvith, recovered from his injuries and present in the gallery, stood at attention and saluted as his people voted. The Calaxan raised green. High Scientist Mordhax was weeping, clear, bioluminescent tears that left glowing trails on his face. The Sonnery raised green. The Thessari raised green. Even the smallest species, the ones who have been too afraid to speak before, they raised green. Green, green, green. A wave of emerald light that filled the dome like a sunrise. The vote was unanimous. 416 species. Every single one. Theskrin's voice shook as he read the result. By unanimous acclamation of the Galactic Federated Council. He paused. Humanity is welcome home. Day 321. The quarantine fleet received orders to stand down. Day 322. The first human ships emerged from the Sol system. They were not warships. They were hospital ships, relief vessels, cargo haulers packed with food, medicine, and engineering supplies. Humanity had spent 10 months behind the quarantine preparing, not for war, not for revenge, for this. They had known, somehow, impossibly, they had known that the galaxy would call them back, and they had spent every moment of their exile getting ready to help. The first ship to dock at Station Aurelian was a medical frigate called the Mercy. Its captain, a young woman named Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, stepped off the boarding ramp and was immediately surrounded by a crowd of aliens. Valanthe, Red Honey, Calaxan, Sonnery, dozens of species, all pressing close, reaching out, touching her uniform, her hands, her face, as if to confirm she was real. She smiled. It was the same smile Kira Voss had worn in the conclave chamber, but warmer, less knowing, more hopeful. We're here, she said simply. Tell us where you need us. The human counteroffensive against the Kreth began on day 330. It wasn't just a human operation. It was a joint task force. Red Honey warriors, Galaxian scientists, Sonary logisticians, and human commanders working together in a way that the galaxy had never seen before. The humans didn't take charge. They coordinated. They saw connections between the different species' strengths that no one else could see, and they built a strategy that used every single advantage available. The Battle of Variant Gap, the site of the Red Honey Third Fleet's destruction, was where the counteroffensive began. It was symbolic. Everyone knew it. The Red Honey demanded the honor of leading the assault, and the humans not only agreed, they designed the entire battle plan around Red Honey's strengths. Fleet Commander Corvith led the charge in a brand new flagship, its systems upgraded with human technology. At his side was Captain James Okafor, a human tactical officer who had volunteered for the most dangerous position in the fleet. The Kreth expected to face the same weakened, confused enemy they had been defeating for months. Instead, they faced something new, something unprecedented, a force that fought with the ferocity of Red Honey warriors, the precision of Galaxian science, the cunning of Sonary strategy, and the impossible, irrational, magnificent adaptability of human ingenuity. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Kreth lost 212 ships. The Allied fleet lost 19. When it was over, Corvith opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice was raw with emotion. Today we fought as one. Red Honey, Galaxian, Sonary, human. Today we were not 400 species pretending to be united. Today we were one people. He paused. And that is what the humans gave us. Not technology, not tactics. His voice cracked. Unity, true unity. The kind that only comes when someone shows you what you can be if you stop being afraid of each other. Another pause, and then, in a voice that carried the weight of 18,000 dead warriors and one impossible victory, "Welcome home, humans. Welcome home." Day 400. The Kreth Dominion sued for peace. Not because they had been defeated, though they had lost 31 engagements in a row, but because they were afraid. For the first time in their history, they were genuinely, deeply afraid. They had attacked the galaxy in chaos. They had expected easy conquest. Instead, they had watched that galaxy pull itself together with a speed and unity that should have been impossible. And at the center of it all, holding everything together like the heart of a star, were the humans. The same species the galaxy had declared illegal. The peace terms were generous. The humans insisted on that. "We don't want enemies," Captain Okafor told the Kreth negotiators. "We've had enough of being unwanted. We'd rather have neighbors." The Kreth didn't understand humans. No one really did. But they understood strength, and they understood mercy. And the combination of both was so far outside their experience that it shook them to their core. They signed the treaty. They withdrew. And for the first time in centuries, the border was quiet. Day 500. The Galactic Federated Council held a ceremony. It was the largest gathering in Council history. Delegates from every member species, including the 3 who had withdrawn and subsequently rejoined. Observers from 70 non-member species, including, remarkably, the Kreth, military leaders, scientists, doctors, traders, artists, philosophers. The conclave chamber was filled beyond capacity. Millions more watched via broadcast across the galaxy. Ambassador Kira Voss stood at the center of the chamber. She looked older than she had a year ago, tired, but her eyes were bright and clear. 1 year ago, she said, "This council voted to declare my species illegal. You feared us. You feared what we represented. Change, adaptation, the uncomfortable realization that the galaxy was bigger and more complex than any single species could comprehend alone." She looked around the chamber, meeting eyes and visual organs of every kind. "I want you to know that we understood. We were angry, of course we were angry. We were hurt, but we understood, because fear is not evil. Fear is natural. Fear is the mind's way of protecting itself from what it doesn't understand." She paused. The failure was not in feeling afraid. The failure was in letting fear make your decisions. She held up her hand. In it was a small crystal, not a voting crystal, a memory crystal, the kind used to store historical records for posterity. This crystal contains the story of the last year. Everything that happened, the vote, the exile, the collapse, the return, the war, the peace. I'm donating it to the Council's permanent archives, not as an accusation, not as a trophy. She set the crystal on the podium. As a reminder that the galaxy is an ecosystem, that every species in it has a role to play, that strength comes not from uniformity but from diversity. that the most dangerous thing any civilization can do is look at something it doesn't understand and decide to destroy it rather than learn from it. She smiled, that same smile, the one that had haunted the delegates' dreams. But now it carried no edge, only warmth. We are human. We are messy, chaotic, irrational, stubborn, infuriating, and deeply, profoundly flawed. We break things. We make mistakes. We feel too much and think too fast. And we never, ever stop pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Her voice filled the chamber like something ancient and undeniable. But we also heal. We build. We connect. We look at a galaxy full of strangers, and we see a family waiting to be born. She straightened. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. And no vote, no law, no quarantine fleet will ever change that. My name is Kira Voss. I am a human being. I am not illegal. I was never illegal. And I am honored beyond words to stand here among you as proof that the worst mistakes can be forgiven, and that the galaxy is always, always capable of becoming something better than it was. The chamber was silent, for full heartbeats of absolute silence. Then the Red Honey delegation rose to their feet, all of them, a species of warriors, standing in tribute. The Calaxan followed, then the Sonari, then the Volanthi, then every other species in chamber one by one rising in a wave that swept across the dome like a tide. 416 species, standing, together. Grand Arbiter Thescaron was the last to rise. He stood slowly, all 6 arms spread wide in the Volanthi gesture of absolute respect. This council has no words adequate to express what we owe humanity, he said. So instead of words, we offer this, a promise that as long as this council endures, humanity will never again be made to feel unwelcome in its own galaxy. This is your home. This has always been your home. And we are better, immeasurably, undeniably better, because you are in it. The chamber erupted, not in the cold blue light of condemnation, but in a kaleidoscope of colors. Every species crystals blazing in their own unique hue, a rainbow of light that filled the dome and spilled out into the stars. Kira Voss stood in the center of it all, tears streaming down her face, and she laughed. It was the most human sound in the universe, and the galaxy, for the first time in its long, ancient history, finally understood why that mattered. Years later, historians would study the human illegality crisis as a pivotal moment in galactic civilization, the moment the galaxy stopped being a collection of frightened species and started becoming a true community. They would debate the politics, analyze the economics, dissect the military campaigns. But the beings who lived through it remembered something simpler. They remembered that the galaxy declared humanity illegal, and humanity's response was not to fight, not to flee, not to surrender, but to wait patiently, prepare quietly, and then, when the call came, to show up with open hands and healing and hope. They remembered that humanity answered hatred with help, and they remembered that the galaxy, humbled and ashamed, looked at what humanity offered and finally saw the truth that had been staring in the face all along. Humanity was never the threat. Humanity was the answer, and the galaxy would never make that mistake again.